In the winter of 1854, the people of a tiny Welsh village awoke to a nightmare. Not because of the cold, not because of the storm outside, but because every single door was locked from the outside. They could hear each other calling out, banging on wood, scratching at windows, but no one could get out. The streets were empty, and somewhere in that pale morning fog, footsteps were moving, slowly, from door to door. By nightfall, half the voices had gone silent, and when help finally arrived days later, they found the doors still sealed shut, and the homes completely empty. The records say the village was abandoned. I'm here to tell you that's not true. The year was 1854, and Cwm Carnedd, a remote fishing village clinging to the cliffs of South Wales, had barely changed in centuries. The locals lived simple lives, fishing the grey waters, mending nets by firelight, and ringing the church bell each Sunday. The only road in wound through miles of forest and bog, the kind of place the outside world forgot. Winter was always cruel here. The sea spat salt into the air. The wind tore through the chimneys and the fog. The thick, bone-white fog could roll in so heavy you could lose sight of your own hands. And yet, the villagers endured. They had endured for generations. Until that morning. No one knows exactly when it began. Some say just before first light. Others swear they heard it happen in the dead of night. One by one, the locks turned. Not from inside the home. By the time the first screams rose, it was already too late. Inside, families tried everything. Rattling handles, hammering fists against wood, calling to neighbors they could not see. The streets outside remained silent, except for the footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching over cobblestones, too heavy for a child, too measured for someone running, passing each door, one by one. When the church bell rang that morning, it was not for prayer. It was a warning. End. Peace, indeed. It began with old Mary Lewis. She rose before dawn every day to light her fire and boil water for tea. Her fingers, bent with age, reached for the latch on her front door, but it wouldn't budge. At first, she thought it was the damp, that the swollen wood had stuck in the frame. But when she pulled harder, the latch rattled strangely. She leaned close, listening, and that's when she heard it. The sound of a lock, heavy and deliberate, turning on the other side. Her eyes darted to the window. The glass was fogged. The street beyond, nothing but pale mist. No shape, no movement, just the sound of her own breathing. Across the lane, young Evan Morgan was already awake. He'd been up since the middle of the night, unable to sleep, When he tried to step outside to fetch wood for the stove, his door too refused to open. He shoved his shoulder against it, once, twice. The frame, her voice, muffled through thick oak and fog. By the time the sun edged above the cliffs, the noise had spread. The rattling of handles, the pounding of fists, the sharp panic in voices. Inside the Davies home, a baby cried as its mother clawed at the hinges with a kitchen knife. In the Hughes cottage, 3 brothers tore up their own floorboards, hoping to crawl out through the crawl space. But even there, the old cellar doors were sealed shut with iron. And over it all came that sound again. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching over cobblestones slick with morning frost. They passed the Morgans' home, then the Lewises, then stopped, just beyond the Davies' cottage. No one dared speak. The only sound was the baby's soft whimper, quickly hushed. Then came a scrape, metal against wood, the sound of something heavy, too tall to be a man, stooping at the Davies' door. Its movements were slow, precise, as though it were binding the door with something. The shape paused, turned its head, and though the fog was thick, Pritchard knew it was looking straight at him. He stumbled back, heart hammering. When he dared to look again, the street was empty. Somewhere, a rooster crowed once more. But it was not morning as they knew it. It was the beginning of something else entirely. By mid-morning, the panic had shifted into something heavier. A restless, whispering fear. Inside each cottage, neighbors shouted through walls, through shutters, through small upstairs windows that faced one another. The Morgans yelled to the Hughes across the narrow lane. The Davies shouted toward old Mary's home. Their words tangled in the mist, half heard, carried away by the wind. The first theory was simple. Thieves. Someone, or some group, had sealed the doors to keep the villagers trapped while they looted the homes. "We'll hear them break in soon enough," muttered Evan Morgan to his wife, though his own hands trembled as he checked the shutter locks for the 5th time. But hours passed, and no one came. No doors burst open, no drawers were ransacked, and those trapped inside left to starve or die. But there were no guards, no orders shouted, no gunshots, only that same cold mist curling around the houses like smoke. In Mrs. Hughes' kitchen, a huddle of neighbors sat on stools and crates, their breath clouding in the candlelight. They spoke in low voices, each story darker than the last. "It's the sea," whispered Mary Lewis, her eyes wet and glassy. "We've taken too much from it. It's come to take us back." Someone laughed nervously, but no one joined in. A fisherman named Daffod spoke next, his voice hoarse. "When I was a boy, My grandfather told me of a night when the fog came in from the water and took a whole crew at sea. Their ship drifted back with the tide, but not a soul aboard. The doors to the cabin were barred shut, several at once. 3 sharp raps. Pause. Then again. Mary's voice was barely a whisper. It's marking the houses. Outside, the mist thickened, pressing itself against the shutters like a living thing. And far off, or maybe closer than they dared admit, came the slow, deliberate sound of footsteps on stone, as if the fog itself had learned to walk. By early afternoon, fear had grown teeth. People no longer shouted to each other. They spoke only in whispers, or not at all. And in the Hughes' cramped kitchen, with the candle burning low, old Daffyd leaned forward, his face lit like a skull in the flicker. "You think this is new?" he began, voice low and steady. "It isn't." The others stared at him. He didn't blink. "A long time ago, before my father's father was born, this village was smaller. Just a handful of cottages on the cliff. Back then, they said the sea gave life, but it could take it away just as quick. Fishermen told of a place far from shore, where the water went black under the moon. No stars, no wind, only the sound of something breathing beneath the waves." He paused, eyes darting to the shutter as the wind rattled it once. "One night, a man from here, Rhys Cadell, went out alone, against the tide. They said he was greedy. His only a great black shape, still moving. He brought it ashore and hid it in his cellar. For 3 days, the fog never lifted. And on the 4th, the doors of the village were found locked from the outside. When they broke them open, every home was empty. Not a drop of blood, not a footprint. Just that same black fog rolling out from the houses." Mrs. Hughes swallowed hard. What happened to him? To Rhys? Daffyd's mouth tightened. They say his house was gone. Not burned, not fallen. Gone, as if it had never been built. And where it stood, the ground was wet, as though the tide had been there. No one spoke. From the far end of the room, Mary Lewis's voice quavered. "There's more to it." Daffyd didn't. "It takes what it's come for." The wind outside howled, rattling the iron latch on the shutter. Everyone froze. A sound drifted through the fog. Slow, deliberate, unmistakable. 3 knocks. Followed by the scrape of something heavy dragging across the stones. In the candlelight, no one dared breathe. And by late afternoon, the fear had curdled into restless desperation. The cold had set deep into the bones of the houses. Fires burned low, candles guttered. In the Hughes cottage, a small group of men and women gathered, speaking in urgent, clipped whispers. They were done waiting. "If the doors are locked," said Evan Morgan, his voice tight, "we find another way out." Daffod shook his head. "Cellars, roofs, attics. We tried those a lifetime ago." "Then we try harder." They split into pairs. Evan and young Thomas Hughes climbed into the attic, a cramped, splintered space where the air was thick with dust and mouse droppings. The small roof hatch above them was warped shut. Thomas pulled at it with all his weight. The wood groaned, but didn't open. The sound it made was strange. Not the creak of old timber, but a muffled thud, as though Mary fetched a poker from the stove and jammed it into the crack. With a grunt, she forced it open just enough to peer outside. Her breath caught. The opening was filled with something black. Not solid, not smoke, but a swirling, oily mist that seemed to pulse as she watched. It was cold, too cold, and when she reached toward it, the tips of her fingers stung. She slammed the hatch shut. On the second floor, old Mr. Pritchard leaned out his window as far as he dared. The street below was a pale, shifting soup of fog. Shapes moved in it, just at the edge of sight. One tall, unmoving silhouette stood at the corner where the lane curved out of view. It did not sway. It did not breathe. And then it tilted its head upward, slowly, deliberately, until its gaze locked on his. Pritchard stumbled backward so fast he knocked over a chair. Somewhere outside, the metallic scraping began again, louder now, closer, a sound like chains being dragged over stone. In that moment, everyone knew the truth. The locks were not meant to keep something out. They were meant to keep them in. Evening came without a sunset. The fog swallowed the light before it could touch the cobblestones. The villagers had retreated to the warmest corners of their homes, speaking less now, their ears straining for any sound beyond their own breathing. In the Hughes attic, Evan sat near the shutter, trying to peer into the gray void outside. The air tasted damp and metallic, as though the fog had seeped through the wood. At first, he thought it was his imagination, a faint shape moving between the mist and the wall of the opposite house. Too tall, too narrow. It stood where the lane widened, facing no particular direction, until it turned, slowly. Evan's chest tightened. It was looking directly at him. He could feel it, like a weight pressing between his ribs. His breath caught, and for a moment, he couldn't move. The figure tilted its head to one side. The fog shifted around its legs, as if repelled by its form. It stopped beneath the attic window, craning its head upward in a way no human neck should move. Evan's skin went cold. Without warning, the Watcher was gone, not faded into the fog. Gone, as though the space it had occupied simply ceased to exist. A sound broke the silence. 3 heavy knocks on the front door, each exactly 4 seconds apart. Downstairs, Mary Lewis froze mid. Night fell without warning. The fog outside thickened until it was the color of wet ash, swallowing every trace of daylight. Inside the cottages, candles guttered low. The air grew colder, as though the walls themselves were bleeding heat into the fog. Every sound seemed louder now. The settling of the rafters, the shifting of a chair, the faint drip of water from a leaky pipe. In the Hughes front room, Mary sat with her back to the wall, clutching the baby. The fire had burned down to embers. Beside her, Daffod stared into the dark, a poker in his hand. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard groaned. "That's just the wood," Daffod murmured, though his voice carried no conviction. The groan came again, slower this time, followed by a faint scuff, like a bare foot dragging across dust. From the next house over, a woman screamed, short, sharp. Then he saw nothing but his own pale reflection and the endless gray beyond. Then, a flicker of movement. Not outside, in the glass. Something tall passing through the back of the room. He spun around, but the room was empty. In the Lewis's cottage, old Mary sat at her kitchen table, hands folded tight, eyes fixed on the door. The latch rattled once, twice, then stopped. A moment later, the sound came from the back door. Then the window, moving around the house, circling, testing. And then came the voices. They were soft at first, barely audible beneath the wind. Familiar voices, neighbors calling her name, asking her to open the door. She almost did, until she remembered. She had watched those same neighbors earlier, trapped behind their own doors. Upstairs in the Hughes' attic, Thomas pressed his ear to the roof for several seconds. There was only silence. Then, something pressed against the hatch from above. Slow, heavy, bending the wood inward as if testing its strength. Thomas stumbled back, eyes wide, whispering a prayer under his breath. Somewhere deep in the fog outside, the church bell rang once. The sound was dull, smothered, and wrong. Not a call to worship, a toll. And in every cottage, every villager knew, whatever walked their streets was no longer satisfied with watching. By the second night, they knew they would not last another. The food was running low, the cold was sinking deeper, and the thing outside was growing bolder. Evan Morgan stood in the center of the Hughes' cottage, hands clenched into fists. "We break out tonight," he said. "Roof, door, window, whenever it takes." Daffod and Thomas fetched tools. A hatchet, a crowbar, the iron poker from the hearth. Old Mary gripped her rosary so tightly, the beads cut into her palms. The plan was simple. Work in pairs, force the locks from the inside, and get everyone into the street at once. The hope was that whatever stalked the fog would not be ready for all of them together. The first blow came from Daffod's hatchet, splitting the wooden frame of the back door. The sound rang out like a gunshot, echoing down the empty lanes. They waited for an answer, but none came. Encouraged, Thomas swung the crowbar into the latch, and from it, cold air poured in, sharper than any winter wind. Through the crack, Evan saw movement in the fog, a ripple, as if something massive had just shifted. "Faster!" he barked. Upstairs, the Morgans attacked the roof hatch. Each strike of the poker against the swollen wood sent vibrations through the attic beams. With a final wrench, the hatch gave way. But instead of fresh night air, a choking wave of black mist poured in, curling and twisting like it was alive. It clung to their skin, stinging like frostbite. "Down! Everyone down!" Evan shouted. But it was too late. The front door under Daffod's hatchet burst outward, and the fog rushed in. Not drifting, not swirling, rushing, like water through a broken dam. They spilled into the street, coughing, eyes streaming. The fog pressed close on all sides, and within it, shapes moved. Not just one watcher now. Dozens. Tall, thin silhouettes, their heads tilting in unison, their limbs too long, their movements jerking like marionettes pulled by invisible strings. The villagers ran, or tried to. Every lane twisted back into itself. The houses they passed were their own houses. The church appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again, its bell tolling in slow, uneven chimes. "We're going in circles," Thomas gasped. From above, a deep rumble shook the ground. The fog parted ahead of them, and they saw the locks. Not the kind a man could make. These were thick, black growths, fused into the doors like the barnacles on the hull of a drowned ship. They pulsed faintly, as though alive. Daffod reached out with the crowbar to pry one loose, and it moved. It coiled around the metal like a serpent, pulling it from his grip and vanishing into the wood. Then the watchers stepped closer, not walking, gliding, their heads still tilted, their faceless visages fixed. The cobblestones beneath their feet were wet. Salt water pooled in the cracks, rising fast. And from that water, something enormous stirred. A sound like the sea inhaling, deep and endless. The fog pulled inward, funneling toward the center of the village. The watchers followed, their movements slow and deliberate, herding the people like livestock toward the church square. And in that moment, Evan understood the truth. The locks had never been to keep them safe. They were seals, offering boundaries to hold the prey until the tide came in. And now, the tide was here. They said only one man came out of Cwm Carnedd. Days later, a merchant traveling the forest road found him wandering barefoot, clothes torn, eyes sunken, and wild. His name was Evan Morgan. The merchant took him to the next town, Penmar, and there, in the warm light of the inn, Evan told his story. His voice was raw, cracked from screaming, but the townsfolk listened, transfixed. He spoke of the fog, the watchers, the locks, the tide that came without the sea. When he finished, the innkeeper laid a blanket over his shoulders and poured him a cup of steaming ale. Cwm Carnedd has been empty since my father was a boy. Folks who go there don't come back. Evan shook his head violently. No, you don't understand. He stopped. Through the inn's front window, beyond the glow of the lanterns, he saw it. A figure, tall, thin, motionless, head tilted, watching. The glass began to fog, even though the night outside was clear. A shape formed in the condensation. A handprint. The old man's voice was barely a whisper. Once it's seen you, it doesn't need the village anymore. Evan dropped the cup. It shattered across the floor. And from every door in Penmar came the sound of a lock turning.